Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. This meeting has been live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting. Writing, speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting so as we can keep track on whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly and directly into the microphone when making contributions, and when referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. We have several important reports to consider today, and I anticipate we will deal with the business in our usual efficient manner. So, Sheridan, apologies, and Chair's approval of members' remote participation. Nick, can you provide Ms Sheridan and any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. We have 11 members present in the hall. We have 8 members on Teams. We have 1 apology from Councillor Hislop, and we have 1 member, Councillor Mail, not present at the start of the meeting.
Thank you, Nick. Approved members' remote participation. Declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? Councillor McGregor.
Thank you very much. Morning, Chair. Yeah, I'll declare an interest in items 17 and 18. I have my family members that manage the committee at the Squash Club and the trust at Tundergarth. And I will take myself out of the meeting for both those items.
Thank you. Councillor Hagman.
Thank you, Chair, and yes, good morning all. A declaration of interest just insofar as my councillor position as resources spokesperson. It's a national position, so therefore I won't take myself out of the discussions because we're looking at it locally, but I just wanted to put that out on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Minute of the previous meeting of the 21st of June 2022. Can we note the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of June? Item 4, the Council Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for the period ended 30th of September 2022. A report by Head of Finance and Procurement. This report provides members with an overview of the Council's overall financial monitoring position for the current financial year and the main financial pressures that are anticipated to impact on the Council in 2022 to 2023, including the impact of pay and non-pay inflationary cost increases. Gillian Ross and Paul Garrett are here to assist if any members have any questions. I'll open it up the meeting to member debate. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I see in 3.9 we would do a verbal update on the teachers' pay. I'm just wondering if we can have that update now. And the second thing I would like to raise is on page 27, Appendix 3. Right at the very top, we've got anti-poverty, which is previous financial year slippage of 600. Is that included in the 1290? Or is that additional to the slippage that we had from anti-poverty money? Thank you.
Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the teachers' pay negotiations, the current position is that the teachers have rejected the 5% undifferentiated offer. and have also, the teaching unions have balloted their members in relation to strike action. COSLA are currently considering their next move in relation to this. As far as I'm aware, and as of the end of last week, there was no further offer had been made at this stage, but that is something that's still outstanding. I think, if not before, I think there's an item on this at the leaders' meeting, COSLA leaders' meeting at the end of this month, where we may get more clarity, but there's nothing firm at this stage.
And the slippage from the anti-poverty money?
Julian?
Yes, in terms of page 27, it shows that we have resources of the 1.29 million for anti-poverty, which are all forecast to be utilised in full this year. The way in which the anti-poverty was reflected this year is that there was amounts added from reserves for the current budgeted position, so it wasn't entirely slippage from prior years, it was the reflection of resources that were applied within the budget this year. So at present, all funding is anticipated to be used.
Can I come back in, please, Chair? Yeah, so are we hoping that we can get that anti-poverty money out ASAP because of the cost of living crisis? Thank you.
Julian?
Yes, as indicated, all funding will be, most of it has already gone out the door as we speak.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie?
Thank you, Chair. My question relates, I don't know if it's a question, maybe just a clarification. Page 23, in terms of Appendix 1, there is no narrative attached to what I'm about to say. And it's really to do with the IJB, where we've allocated some £99 million almost. And we know that unmet care needs was running at 3,500. It had reduced to 3,000 hours of unmet need. And it's really to see, we have allocated that money and whether indeed there is going to be not a surplus, but an underspend to the IGB. And I know the Scottish Government has talked about reprofiling. To me, that's clawback. And if anyone was going to consider clawback on unmet need, it should be the Council. And it's really to ask that question, just where it is with that 99 million in terms of the unmet need and the reserves that could accrue therefrom. And who should be clawing that back? If it's not that I'm looking to claw back, we should be spending that and finding care workers to deliver the service that we have been commissioned to do.
Paul?
Yep. We're in close contact with colleagues in the Health Service and in IGB in relation to the monitoring position for the current year. In fact, I met with Katie Kerr, Director of Finance, there yesterday in relation to some of these issues. In terms of the current year, obviously IGBs have been impacted, as have other public bodies, by things like the enhanced pay award beyond the levels initially anticipated, the enhanced levels of non-pay inflation as well. So there's pressures coming from that direction in the current financial year. Some of the monies that the Council have received in relation to the pay increase from the Scottish Government are being passed on to the IGB to help support those pressures. But even taking those into account, there's still a deficit there to be met by the IGB itself. So at the moment, we are anticipating that the social care element, the delegated budget from the Council to the IGB, we're expecting to have, it's a slight deficit, very slight deficit that's estimated at the current stage. So we're not anticipating a surplus against that £99 million budget in the current year. However, the IGB did bring significant reserves into the current year. They're largely committed at this stage, although there are some uncommitted elements. So what we are trying to do, and we're working closely together, is to ensure, taking into account the Scottish Government's current clawback arrangements, that the risk of losing resources to Dumfries and Galloway as a whole is minimised. And I think because of our current position and the extent to which reserves are already committed, the risk is very minor, or low certainly, in Dumfries and Galloway. But obviously this is a kind of moving position in terms of some of the things that Scottish Government are looking at the minute. Obviously there was further announcements last week, so it's something we're regularly monitoring and keeping on top on. But I think between us we're trying to ensure that any resources available to Dumfries and Galloway are not lost as part of that clawback.
Councillor Scobie.
If I could go back, I'm grateful for the explanation given. I just would ask that we put this in the narrative so that we do keep an eye on it as Finance and Procurement Committee, so that we can see what's happening there. As I say, grateful for the explanation given by Paul, but we really need to keep our eye on it, that no money is or are clawed back by Scottish Government, that it's used in region.
Paul?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair, and we'll make sure that furthermore reports makes reference to that and cover that issue. Also, when we're bringing forward the budget reports, budget setting reports for next year, that there's attention paid to that particular issue as part of that as well.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Young?
Thanks, Chair. I note in recommendation 2.3 on page 15 that there's a £1.7 million in loan charges and underspent. Now, obviously, that represents about £25 million of capital that hasn't gone ahead. Would that be one big project, or just because of COVID, lots of little capital spend mounting up to give this 1.7 million underspend in loan charges? Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. Yep. No, as Councillor Young indicates, that the main reason for that loan charges underspend in the current year is the reduced level of capital expenditure and therefore borrowing the council is required to undertake because of delays on capital projects. That has been spread over a combination of priority projects and asset classes. So it's a number of projects. A lot of this slippage was at the tail end of the last financial year, with some further delays in the current year, which are reflected in a later report on today's agenda. But what we're actually starting to see now more in relation to our loan charges forecasting is the impact of the increased interest rates coming through, not on our cost of borrowing, but on the level of investment income that we're able to generate. We're currently in a position whereby we're not requiring to undertake any further borrowing, so our borrowing costs are not increasing. But because we have got surplus funds, which we're reporting, again, there's a separate report today in the Treasury Management Strategy which goes into that in a bit more detail. But because we're holding surplus funds, we're investing those at the minute in very safe counterparties, obviously. And because interest rates have increased of late, we're starting to see a greater level of investment income now being accrued. At the start of the year, we were getting well below 1% on our temporary investments. I think our most recent temporary investments are up to 3%. So we are starting to generate increased investment income. So that's coming through the Treasury Management Report, starting to be reflected in our loan charges forecasts. And again, that's something we're looking at further in terms of future projections, in terms of our budget setting deliberations as we take this forward.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Hagman?
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question on page 16, the National Insurance Rise reversal. Do we have a current figure on what that's looking like?
Gillian?
Thank you, Councillor Hagman. Yes, we've been able to calculate that the total resources that we should be able to return back to the corporate fund for this year will be in the region of £500,000, with the full resource of £1.2 million recoverable from 23-24.
Thank you, Gillian. Councillor Dorward?
Thank you, Chair. This is concerning 3.4 to roughly 3.9 about the pay situation, pay increases. And we've already noted that our colleagues in education have rejected 5% undifferentiated offer. 3.7 states that Scottish Government, in terms of the SGC award, have contributed a significant amount, but that still leaves the council with a shortfall of 1.6 million, and we're not sure in terms of the ongoing discussions with our education colleagues what the pay agreement might look like. But again, concerning to me is the SGC. It says at 3.4 that has been agreed, but actually there's a review clause in that agreement, which effectively means that if our education colleagues have a better deal for putting it for what a better expression, then that might come back again and put increasing pressures on our budget. Is my interpretation correct there?
Yes, just to confirm that that assumption is correct. That there is the clause within the pay offer that if the teacher's pay award is enhanced, that it could option to be reopened the SGC position.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. It was just actually on the 2.3 again in the recommendations. I see that we've been asked to note all of these things, but at 2.3, it almost begs the question: should we be determining whether or not to agree what to do with the £1.7 million? Because I think we're seeing that the capital investment strategy, and there's data on this in a later report, isn't actually being delivered. It's sort of at 71% of the target, I think. And obviously 1.7 is not an insubstantial amount of money. Paul, you were saying just there that actually we're getting a better return potentially on short-term, medium-term investments. So must this go into the capital fund, or is this just saying, are you telling us, yeah, this is what's happening, we're just letting you know, or should we actually be agreeing this, given that there might be another option for it? Thank you.
Paul.
Yes, there is an option to treat this money differently and perhaps retain it in revenue. What I'm suggesting in the report is that we hold it in the capital fund pending further member consideration of its allocation, so we wouldn't be allocating that money to any particular capital projects. We've not requested any additional funding to address the impact of inflation in the capital programme in the current financial year, partly because of the delays we previously referred to. So this money would be held pending further member consideration as part of development of the capital investment strategy. However, I fully appreciate that if members wish to use this, retain this in revenue and apply it differently, that could be done. The only thing I would say there, and one of the reasons why I'm saying it'd be better in the capital fund, is that we don't have a kind of a shortfall in the current year in terms of non-recurring resources available to us, as reflected in the review of reserves report that's come up this morning. We're well off in terms of non-recurring funding available to the council, and this 1.7 million obviously would be non-recurring. So I've suggested that, given the link between the loan charges underspend and the capital programme, the most appropriate place for it is within the capital fund, pending further member consideration. But I do appreciate if members wish to do something different, that could be accommodated.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Paul, that's helpful. And I certainly would, I think your advice is probably sage, but what you're saying is basically you're recommending that that's what we do. Which, if that's a recommendation, is probably something we should agree. It's just more of a semantic thing, but I know members are sort of not necessarily eager to get lots of reports about noting, but I know we're following that up in different sort of circles. But it's maybe we need to agree this rather than note it, Chair. It's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Maybe it might be helpful if the recommendation was changed from will be transferred to could be, and in that way it leaves it open. The way I'm reading it at the moment, that these resources will be transferred. So maybe that's an option.
Councillor Johnston.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Thompson is perfectly correct here. This very much looks like a recommendation, and I think, again, building on what Councillor Campbell's just been saying, I think possibly the recommendation should be that we recommend, or this money is transferred subject to a report coming back or some form of discussion on how we allocate that going forward. And as usual, when I make comments like that, I would kind of like a date on that.
Paul.
Yep, so a couple of things. Firstly, I agree that agree would probably be the appropriate start of this recommendation rather than noting. I think in terms of how we've drafted the report, if we'd been asking members to allocate the money for a particular purpose, it would have been agree. You know, what I was kind of suggesting here is you put it in the capital fund pending that further consideration. But if this was agree to transfer the capital fund pending that further member consideration, that would be addressed as part of the development of the capital investment strategy, and we will be bringing forward a report on that to the first meeting of this committee after the turn of the calendar year. So the Scottish Government will announce hopefully its Scottish budget on the 15th of December, and that will have a revenue budget, revenue grant allocation, but also a capital grant allocation. That will inform a report that will come forward on how much money we've got available for capital, what the commitments and pressures are in relation to that, and we'll bring that report to the meeting of the FPT committee. I'm not sure if it's January or February. I think it's late January. Late January, and in that report we can certainly make reference to the availability. That was the intention, the availability of this funding, and that can come into that consideration if that's okay.
Thanks, Paul. I can't see anybody else wanting in, so we'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to, 1, note that the key areas of focus of budget monitoring during the year will continue to include the financial risks of the ongoing pay award negotiations and the extent of the inflationary increases impacting on council services, as noted in sections 3.3 to 3.14. 2, note the projected service outturn positions as provided in Appendix 1 and highlighted within sections 3.16 to 3.22.
Just picking up members' comments there at recommendation 2.3, so reflecting the discussion, note that loan charges are expected to underspend by 1.7 million by the end of the financial year, and agree that these resources will be transferred to the capital fund pending further development of the capital investment strategy, with a report back to the next committee.
Moving on, the item number 5, the impact of the inflationary. Sorry. Oh,
2.4, sorry.
Sorry. The estimated, and note the estimated financial impact associated with COVID-19 and the cost of living as set out in Appendix 2, which will require to be funded from the resources set aside within service reserves, as noted at section 3.27. Item number 5, the impact of the inflationary cost increases on the council budgets 2022-23, report by Head of Finance and Procurement. Members are provided with an update on the impact of the non-pay inflationary cost pressures, and in particular energy costs currently being experienced by the council. The report also sets out the planned approach to addressing the estimated 2022-23 funding requirement of £4.87 million as a result of this. While the inflationary cost increases reflected in the paper relate specifically to the current financial year, we are being advised that officers are assessing projected inflationary cost increases beyond the current financial year as part of the development of the council's medium-term financial strategy that will be reported to full council at the end of this month. Paul Garrett is here to assist if members have any questions, and I will open it up to member debate. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. It was actually just a question on the table about energy usage on page 31, and it's about biomass, because I know we have a use of biomass in some of our schools particularly, so it was really just to see, but presumably that comes under other, but I just sort of wondered in terms of the cost increase compared to other energy types, if that's if there's detail on that anywhere. And happy for it to be shared, you know, after the committee or whatever, but thank you.
You're correct. The biomass is particularly within some of our newer schools, and those are classed within the energy other section within there. It's highlighted within the appendix that is subject to a significant increase this year of around about the 100% price. And I can provide details in terms of the cost increases over the last year, you know, if that's helpful. But it is like all energy attributes at the moment, and that there is significant increases in those costs at the moment.
Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. It's just that I was a bit surprised reading the recommendations, and I got down to 2.5, and it's bringing back a report outlining measures that can be taken to reduce our energy consumption. And I kind of thought we'd declared a climate emergency and it was a priority. So I was kind of rather surprised that that was being spelt out. And this is not something we should have been doing anyway.
Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of reflect, there is a report in our committee agenda. At the time this report was initially presented was for the September committee, so there has been some progress around a number of items prior to that report being laid. So the report coming to committee isn't just about what we are doing, what we could do, it's reflecting what we have been doing, quite a substantial amount of work around energy reduction. But of course, we do live in a cold climate in the winter, and we do have to heat buildings, and requirements around schools in particular, and COVID measures around ventilation. So there's quite a number of actions there about what we have been doing to try and mitigate both the energy cost increase, but also our energy usage in general, whether the costs were increasing or otherwise.
Thank you, Chair. We just come back in. I mean, there's nothing like a cost increase to focus the mind, I suppose.
Councillor Jimison.
Yeah, I just wondered that this table is quite a general, broad analysis. Is there any more specific analysis on individual sectors, individual areas where we could identify a bigger opportunity for savings? From what your earlier explanation, you're obviously looking at things in more detail, but it would be interesting to see which services actually could make the biggest difference quicker than others.
Lorna.
So I'll refer members to the report that will be considered next Tuesday in our committee, and that does provide for quite substantial analysis by premises and areas, and that provides some insight into that. I'm sure members will want some further information beyond that in the report, but substantial. So I won't sort of rehearse that debate ahead of our committee, but that information will be available.
Thanks, Lorna. I can't see anyone else wanting in, so I'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to 1. Note the continued escalation of inflationary pressures and the expectation that very high levels of inflation will be experienced for a more prolonged period than had previously been anticipated, which will impact significantly on a range of costs incurred by the Council. 2. Note that it is currently estimated that the non-pay inflationary cost pressures will increase the cost of Council services by £4.870 million in 2022 to 2023, with increased energy costs being the main contributor to this increase, as set out at paragraph 3.7 and at the appendix. 3. Agree to allocate the required funding to address the current year budget shortfall, currently estimated at £1.540 million, from the Budget Resilience Reserve in order to protect services over the immediate term. 4. Note that the projections of inflationary cost increases beyond the current financial year are currently being assessed as part of the development of the Council's medium-term financial strategy, as reported to full Council last month. And 5, agree that a report outlining measures that can be taken to reduce the Council's energy and fuel consumption and accelerate the shift to renewable energy sources is brought to the next meeting of the Economy and Resources Committee. Moving on, item 6, review of the committed reserves and service reserves, report by Head of Finance and Procurement. This report provides members with details of the agreed review of committed reserves and service reserves for our consideration, and also sets out those amounts that have been identified for release and further member consideration as a result of this review. Gillian Ross and Paul Garrett are here to assist if members have any questions. I'll open up to member debate. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. It's just when we get down to 2.4, and it's should members agree to support the request for additional investment, should we not really discuss item 8 before we do item 6?
Paul?
No, I appreciate that obviously the decision at item 8 will have an impact on this. I felt it was appropriate to basically set this money aside at this stage, but as reflected in the report, if members don't decide that, then it would just increase the amount that goes into unallocated reserves. So I don't think there's any reason to preclude the decision that's reflected in this paper, because we haven't yet considered item 8, but I do fully appreciate that item 8 will have an influence on how the final allocation of reserves is determined.
Thank you. So that means that if we did decide not to, which I find highly unlikely, to invest the money in the road, it will just go back into these reserves for future discussion at some point.
Paul?
Yep, that's correct, yep.
Councillor Hagman?
Thank you, Chair. It's a really simple question I've got, and that's there's no mention at all anywhere in the report about any recommendations from Audit Scotland in terms of good practice guide in terms of our reserves, and also what the opinion is of our external auditor on what we should be having in reserves for, just as good practice. So it's disappointing it's not in there, and I think it's really important that we clarify to all members that there is guidance of, what should we have in reserves, in terms of good practice for Audit Scotland. Thanks.
Paul?
Yep, no, I appreciate that obviously that there's other elements that we could have brought into the report. I think the report was focused on the specific review of the reserves that are reflected in the papers. The Audit Scotland and external audit guidance is very high level. They don't give any kind of indications of amounts that council should hold, and it should all be determined in relation to local circumstances. There is a kind of general view that there should be a non-allocated reserve of at least 2% of annual planned expenditure held by councils. It's not stated firmly anywhere, but that's a kind of general understanding that we have across councils. That's in our general fund balances, which have been kept separate from this specific review, so that this review has been about those, as we say in the report title, the committed and service reserves that are beyond those general fund balances that the Audit Scotland guidance refers to. However, no, what I would say is that we are obviously in close contact with our auditors in relation to our overall financial position and the presentation of our accounts, and the members obviously receive through the audit committee details of the audit report each year on the council's financial position, and I would fully anticipate that that will be the case again when the auditors complete their work. But I fully understand what Councillor Hagman's saying, but the purpose of this report has been to focus on those committed and service reserves, and although there's kind of general Audit Scotland guidance, there's nothing specific that would really help members significantly in terms of some of the decisions they're being asked to take in relation to this paper.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's on page 47, paragraph 3.9. I'm just wondering about the rationale behind the name change from COVID-19 to COVID-19 and the cost of living response reserves. COVID-19 hasn't gone away. There's still people off, staff off with COVID at the moment. There's long-term COVID as well, which we don't know how that's going to play out. For example, we've also got the cost of living, which I think that's foremost of everybody's minds. So it was just the 2 million that's been set aside for that particular purpose. How do we, differentiate between what's required from us from COVID or us from the cost of living response? So I've no issues with the name change. It's just that how do we, control those two asks in one sort of pot of money? Thanks.
Paul?
No, it's a very fair point, and one we've obviously considered as part of this recommendation. When we got to the previous financial year end, we released some COVID monies back to unallocated balances, but recommended to members that we retain £2 million for the potential ongoing impact of COVID-19 on the council's costs and income levels. Based on monitoring to date, we're not spending anything like that kind of level. And I mean, I fully appreciate what you're saying and I agree that COVID's not going away, but I think the risk of lockdowns or significant restrictions that will lead to increases in council costs or significant losses of income has receded during this period. So I do feel as though it is likely that we would not require that £2 million specifically for COVID-related impacts. And obviously, cost of living has now almost become the new focus in terms of some of the more response-like measures that the councils have to take in the current period. And obviously, we're seeing that through our homelessness service at the minute. So that's why we've recommended the expansion of the potential utilisation of that reserve to cover both COVID and cost of living. But in terms of the points you're making, we're very conscious of those. We'll continue to monitor those. And as I think I'm right in saying, in fact, in the earlier paper where we talk about the use of this reserve, we do separate out how much relates to COVID-19, how much relates to cost of living, and we'd look to continue doing that as the financial year progresses, so members get that information as we take this forward.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Walters.
I just wanted to ask on 2.3 on page 45, the thing about setting aside 300,000 for the local government elections. I was wondering why this came from reserves rather than it wasn't budgeted expenditure already, seeing as we all knew that the elections were coming.
Paul?
Yep, I think probably the main reason for that is it's not a recurring cost. Obviously, it's only once every 5 years that we undertake the council local elections, so it's not something we look to reflect in our base budget, and what we've tried to do is identify non-recurring resources to address that. Again, I think it's a fair point, but I think given that it's only once every 5 years, it's appropriate to try and fund it on this kind of non-recurring basis from reserves rather than from within the base budget level. And obviously there's the opportunity to do that as reflected in the report, but I do understand the point.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was a couple of points. I mean, just in terms of the cost of living stroke COVID fund, I think there is something in that in terms of what Councillor Campbell's raised, because there's no logical connection between COVID effects and cost of living crisis any more so than any other thing. So it does maybe, it could be doing to be separated out, because I think the cost of living one is the main council priority at the moment in terms of how we address that. But that aside, it was a question on the second homes discount fund, which is sitting in the papers anyway. The reserves at 3.659 million, and obviously we're hearing quite a lot about inflationary pressures in terms of build costs. For obviously we've got our SHIP, the programme for house building in the area. So presumably that fund in there could be, if the right business case is made available through E&R, presumably in terms of enhancing or increasing the ability to actually deliver on our programme.
Yeah, that would be my understanding. Thanks, Chair, but I have to admit I'm not got full details on exactly how those monies can be utilised. It's something that's considered through the Economy and Resources Committee. I think the Housing Officer brings regular reports to members on how those monies can be utilised. So certainly I can pass that back to the manager and ask him to provide that clarification in the next report that comes forward, if that's okay.
Thanks, Paul. I can't see anybody else voting in. We'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to 1. Note the approach taken to the review of all committed reserves and service reserves, which has recently been undertaken, and note the findings from this review as summarised at paragraph 3.3 to this report and detailed within the supporting appendices. 2. Agree to release of funding totalling £3.185 million from those reserves identified at Appendix 3 to this report. 3. Agree to set aside £300,000 from the release funding to support the costs of the May 2022 local government election. And 4. Agree that should members agree to support the request for the additional investment of £800,000 to support the road service as set out in a separate report on this agenda, this amount should also be met from within the funding released through this review of reserves, and that the remaining £2.085 million should be added to unallocated balances at this stage, pending further member consideration of its application as part of the development of the Council Plan and the medium-term financial strategy. And 5. Agree to widen the potential application of the COVID-19 response reserve to also cover increased council costs associated with increased pressures related to the current cost of living crisis. Item 7, Information Strategy, Request for Funding, Report by Head of Governance and Assurance. This report presents a request from Communities Committee for the allocation of non-recurring funding of £195,000 from the Change Fund to resource the council-wide change programme to implement the refreshed information strategy. Nick Evans and Vlad Valente are here to assist if members have any questions. I'll open it up to member debate. Councillor Dorward.
Thank you, Chair. Noting in the report, and maybe with some note to 8 as well, and it's a question and it's not a criticism, is that both, certainly 7 looks at a temporary post of a programme manager and programme administrator, and in 8 some of the funding is looking at somebody to oversee capital spending. And my question is about capacity and resilience of the council in terms of this role. Do we need to look at that? Thank you.
Vlad.
I could speak to this particular item, and yes, the need for this is that we do require that extra resource in terms of taking this vision that we've got for this strategy forward. So it's a significant change in the culture of how we deal with the kind of file shares and world in regards to potentially using Microsoft 365 and using the cloud as appropriate. In order for us to do so, we do need that extra capacity of that kind of program manager and that project management element of things that we just don't have within the team at the moment, as well as that kind of program administrator that will assist to drive this particular project forward. It is that 2-year kind of timescale that we're looking at, but it's significant because it goes right across all of the council in terms of the way that we manage our electronic filing in particular, but also goes beyond that. It is about our information and there's a bit of business intelligence as well that we would obviously get as a result of that. But ultimately, the main drive is more about how we're storing that information and make sure that we're moving with the kind of modern practices on it. But in order to do so, we absolutely need the capacity in order to drive it. We do not have that capacity currently within the team.
Thanks, Vlad. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just a question on the, what the difference this will make. I don't sit in communities, but I did have a chance to look back at the communities report, which isn't, it doesn't have that detail particularly in this actual report. But in terms of the benefit to the council, obviously it's looking to digitise and change sort of transformative systems and make that sort of council-wide, if you like. But if you were to put a figure on what that 195k could do to sort of realise efficiencies in terms of time or efficiency, what would be the notional figure? Because clearly it brings us forward into the technology we've got nowadays, but I mean, what benefits would we see in terms of both council staff and the customers or the citizens? Thank you.
Vlad.
Yep, absolutely understand the question, but it'd be impossible for me to quantify that. I think the most important thing is absolutely the efficiencies around how we store information and how we manage our information, and ultimately how you as members get that information from officers. It's a lot easier. So just to give you an example, if it takes us potentially days or weeks for us to gather all the information that we've got stored in different platforms and different systems and in different ways, that's inefficiencies within our service, particularly when the member asks for what's the stats around this. We should be able to touch a button and those stats should be provided to you. So it's very hard to quantify it, but certainly our current systems are not effective in the way that you would expect within, as I said, the kind of modern practice. And moving forward, that's what we want to drive. But it would be very hard for me to quantify what that looks like in money terms as such. But I think we would all see very clearly and evidence that very clearly in our working practices.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Vlad. I appreciate it's difficult to put that into a figure, but sort of on a Bobby Basic level for me, presumably we'll see increased productivity potentially. So we'll get better value for our money, even though we can't put a value in what the savings might be. It won't be a saving, it'll just be increased productivity and service delivery, presumably. Thank you.
Vlad.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It would drive efficiencies within all of the council in terms of how we file our data, but more importantly how we access that data, which is probably where the biggest saving will be in terms of time spent to gather that information. If we've got it properly stored, it's easier to access. So yeah, absolutely. And in effect, in practical terms, teams that would not be wasting their time doing some of that double inputting, triple inputting at times, it'd be done once and effectively.
Thanks, Vlad. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. It's as Councillor Thompson was saying there, I clearly see this as a spend to save type project, to be honest, and it would have been nice to have a bit of a financial breakdown. Vlad's just highlighted a few cost savings there already, which I'm sure it could have been possible to put some figures on it. But again, I was going to ask a question about the temporary posts, and as Councillor Dorwood mentioned there with resilience and capacity within the council, and the same as item 8, we're talking about temporary posts here, and it's quite difficult at the moment to recruit staff, and I think perhaps this might lead to problems when we're only recruiting for a 2-year period, and I just wondered if you foresee any difficulties in actually filling these roles for the 2 years, given obviously there's an end date on the contract.
Vlad.
Yes, absolutely understand where you're coming from, Councillor, on the recruitment front. I think our aim would be to look at both recruitment, but also look at what frameworks we might have available that taps into the relevant employees, which would be through a kind of consultancy type framework that we can bring in for that 2-year period. Ultimately, we would look at all the available options on that front, recognising absolutely that it's always harder to recruit on a temporary basis than it is on a permanent basis, but this is a very focused programme of 2 years, and therefore I think that's all that's required. Once the systems are in place, it's just about us continuing to manage that, but it's front loading it so that obviously the staff that are dealing with it day in, day out don't have to.
Councillor Brodie.
I share Councillor Johnson's concern about temporary posts, but it's the world we live in. Government finance policy changes from day to day, week to week, and we don't know what's going to happen down the line. We know that there's going to be cutbacks. We don't know how much cutbacks there's going to be, but there's going to be a lot of them. So we can't commit to the longer contract, unfortunately, because of the financial situation. We live on a budget from year to year. We really need to, Scottish Government, UK, to have 3 years or 5 years programmes so that we can plan ahead and get the staff we want on permanent contracts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just a request, not a request for funding, by the way, a request that when we get service committees asking for funding, that we actually get part of the report. You know, it came from communities. I know it's in the background, but maybe an appendix, you know, attached to the report, and then members, especially those who don't sit on communities, for example, you know, they can actually see the report, because quite often people just don't go at the background reports. But if it was actually attached to the reports, and that goes for the next item as well, which is item 8, another request. So I'm just asking if that could be possible. We did get that in the past, so maybe we can just carry that forward. Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, through you, Chair, could I just come in on that?
Yep.
I think if it's okay with members, what we'll do is between Nick and I, we'll take that as an item for discussion within the Business Bureau, just to fully discuss that particular point, because there are advantages and disadvantages to that, and particularly the volume of paperwork that would then be encompassed if we do include it. But we can have that discussion at the Business Bureau. I think it's the appropriate forum for that discussion.
Thanks, Vlad. We'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to 1. Note the decision of Communities Committee to make a request for non-recurring funding to support the council-wide change programme to implement the refreshed information strategy as detailed at 3.3. And 2. Agree to the approval of 2 years non-recurring funding from the Change Fund totalling £195,000 as detailed in paragraph 3.3 to support the implementation of the information strategy programme. Moving on to item number 8, the Roads and Infrastructure Service Resources report by Director of Communities. This report seeks members' consideration to the allocation of funding for additional temporary staffing to support the implementation of key projects and programmes in the Roads and Infrastructure Service, including winter resilience and capital programme delivery. Harry Hay is here to assist if members have any questions. I'll open up the meeting to member debate. Councillor Stitt.
Just on the
Cheers, Chair. Just on the chart at 3.2.6, Harry, I think you'll be answering this. I take it the two road supervisors, will they be one in the east, one in the west? And when the other 10 road operatives, are they got to be equally shared within the 4 regions?
Harry.
Thanks, through you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. We'll ensure that all the appointments reflect the needs of the wider region, so it will be shared equitably across the whole of Dumfries and Galloway. Yeah.
Thanks, Harry.
Councillor Crothers.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, Harry. I'm looking at 3.2.6, Harry, in particular. You've got the 4 boxes outlining the different levels of funding being asked for today, making up to the 800k. The very last box talks about additional professional resource. I'd like to know I suppose going back to maybe John Campbell's picked up it previously, but the detail in regards to that, I'd like to know exactly what that 150k does. What does it mean? Certainly welcome the extra 800k going into the Roads Authority. But I do think as far as the posts are concerned, it's maybe been touched on in the previous item very lightly, but I think the 15-month contract is insufficient. We'll find that difficult to attract members of staff coming forward for this. And we all know exactly how important it is for us to make sure our potholes are filled, or the winter's resilience in particular, I think, to start off with, that we can actually carry those duties out, those statutory duties, I should say. But no, in order for me to better understand, there's quite a bit of information missing within this in regards to the detail, Harry, for me, but I can maybe pick some of it up offline. But the 150k in particular, and I do think we should have a minimum 2-year contract. That's maybe something I'll come back to, Chair. But I think in simple terms, the way I would describe it is that if I was in a job at £10 an hour and in a permanent place, and somebody offered me a job for £11 an hour for 15 months, there'd be no chance, and I bet nobody else in the chamber making this decision today would take up on that job. So I just think we really are thinking seriously as a council, in as far as our roads are concerned, that we look to invest. And if we do agree to 24 months as a minimum, is what I'm thinking, then I'd like to think that the leaders panel would pick that up going forward in the next budget in any potential insufficient funding at this moment. So the two aspects at the moment, Harry, please, the detail at 150k, and I think the 15 months, that'll really negate any chance of getting some filling these 12 posts in particular.
Harry.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Crothers, for your points. Yeah, I mean, in the report, it mentions that clearly there is a risk, even if the budget is allocated, that recruitment and selection may be challenging, simply because the market out there is very competitive at the moment in terms of particularly construction and driving sectors. So that's very much recognised. And as the report details, the request is for non-recurring funding for the timescales that are outlined. And I guess just to pick up on that point, what we have detailed at section 329 is that it highlights the fact that if there is a will to have sustained funding, I think that would have to be considered as part of the forthcoming budget development process. So absolutely acknowledge, Councillor Crothers, it's not the ideal position, but I think certainly I'm confident that it would give us a starting point to make the impact. In terms of the 150k for the additional professional resource, very similar to the last item. In terms of how we want to take that forward, we'll be in discussion obviously with HR and indeed procurement to make sure that we can get value for money from those appointments. And clearly, as has already been indicated, one of the advantages in terms of trying to deal with a very competitive recruitment market is that if you use professional support of that type, it can be done for discrete items of work. And I think one of the things I've picked up, certainly in the last 4 weeks, that across the whole of roads and infrastructure, there are some pretty large projects that need that effective project management that will really start to deliver the results that members are making very clear to me that they want to see in Dumfries and Galloway, and continue to build on the good work that we're doing. So obviously, as we take that forward, will ensure that the appropriate council, be it HR or procurement processes, will be absolutely followed. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Harry. Thanks, Chair. Sorry for just coming in. I'll just, if you don't mind, just a quick follow-up. It's in regards to that. So, Harry, it sounds to me like there's potential we're going to have employees or potential consultants. I'm looking for that finer detail, please, if possible, in regards to 150k in particular.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Cross, you're absolutely right. It could be both, which is why we're wanting to engage with both procurement and HR as to what would give us the biggest impact. I mean, I think the challenge we've got clearly is the timescale. We want to hit the ground absolutely running with this, and what we tried to do was ensure that there are 2 winter periods covered by this, because this would take us up to the end of March 2024, because it recognised that it ain't a sustainable model moving forward, and in parallel to that, absolutely, I want to assure members that there's a lot of work to do to ensure that the roads and infrastructure service moving forward is sustainable and delivers, I guess, on the ambitions that the council's got for that particular service. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. Councillor Brodie.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I won't repeat my comments on the last item about temporary posts, but it's not just, this is a position not just meeting councils, but it's affecting businesses. It's because the financial climate is so uncertain for business and for third organisations which I'm involved with, and temporary posts are often now the norm, because businesses and third sector organisations just can't commit to the future. But I think it should be an absolute priority for the council. This is an absolute priority for the council. So once the financial situation becomes more certain, then perhaps we can make these posts permanent. And I think that's what we should aim to do. The independent group and myself as a Liberal Democrat, we really welcome this report, because it's taken the priorities of our local constituents seriously about potholes. It's the first step. It's the first step on giving us resilience as a council to deliver better roads, better winter services, better support for communities in the summer when there's flash floods and they need help. And it's the first step on getting a capital programme which delivers what the people of Dumfries and Galloway want, which is better roads, better maintained, and proper investment into our infrastructure. And I think we should be positive about it and see this as the first step on our journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Right, I can't see anybody else wanting in, so I'll move to Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, no, thanks, and sorry to leave it so late, but no, I fully support the report. I think I suppose we would normally expect reports to come to this committee via a sort of specific route in terms of governance or whatever, but I think given the nature of what this report's actually here for, the time duration and the fact that it's such a priority for us, especially following the reports to communities about winter resilience, etc. I think that's why we need to kind of address this now. So it's probably exceptional in some senses, but I think it's absolutely necessary, so happy to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Scobie.
Just a quick one, Chair. Again, in support of the paper and the need, if you like, when we look at 10 road operatives for winter period, we could be facing difficulty if we don't. And it's really just additional professional resources to develop and implement the significant capital projects across R&I service, 12 to 15 month duration. I just refer again as an example, the Stranraer Flood Prevention Scheme that I read is now being put back to the spring of 2023, when we've been given date after date after date for that scheme to be finished. And in terms of capital projects, we need to get on top of these and deliver what we should be on dates that are given, rather than constant delay after delay. So I welcome the report and hope that it does deliver what it's saying, doing what it says on the tin.
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. I'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to 1. Agree to the allocation of £800,000 for additional temporary staffing to the 31st of March 2024 to support the implementation of key projects and programmes in the Roads and Infrastructure Service as detailed in section 3.2. And 2, agree that this allocation be funded from the resources released through the recent review of committed and service reserves as detailed in a separate report on this agenda, but that a review of resources available to the Communities Directorate be undertaken to seek to minimise this requirement for the application of corporate funding. Item 9, Finance and Procurement Revenue Budget Monitoring 2022 to 2023 for the period ended 30th of September 2022. Report by Head of Finance and Procurement. Members are provided with an overview of performance against budget for the period ending the 30th of September 2022 for Finance and Procurement. Gillian Ross is here to assist me if any members have any questions. I'll open it up to member debate. Can't see anyone wanting it in, so we'll move to the recommendation. Members are asked to note that the Finance and Procurement is forecast to deliver a balanced budget by the end of the financial year based on the position as at the end of September 2022, excluding those costs that have been attributed to COVID-19 response and recovery detailed at section 3.6. Moving on to Item 10, Capital Investment Strategy Monitoring 2022 to 23, Quarter 2, Report by Head of Finance and Procurement. This report provides members with an overview of the financial and physical progress of the capital programme for the current financial year based on the position as at the 30th of September 2022. Issues in relation to the overall funding of the investment strategy and the progress of the approved programmes within that strategy are reflected in this report. Members will be aware that more detailed information on agreed projects within the approved programmes are reflected within the asset class reports presented to the relevant service committees. Karen Donaldson and Paul Garrett are here to assist if members have any questions. We'll open this meeting up to member debate. Councillor Jimison.
Yeah, as regards the recommendations 2.3, the 3.15 million from the Dumfries High School project being fenced for autism provision. Well, I've no issues with that. Again, this committee could maybe do with a little bit more background and detail in how that's progressing.
Paul.
Happy to do that going forward. In terms of this committee, previously agreed the funding for the Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2 as a whole. That this is a transfer of resource within that same budget, so we haven't put a huge amount of detail into this particular report. But now that move has been made, going forward, once we do see the development of the autism provision, we'll certainly look to reflect that in subsequent reports.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. It's just on the appendix on page 83, in terms of the profile of the capital expenditure over a number of years. So it was really just like when I'm looking at that, I see the last column, if you like, before the grand total, but the 2031-32 year. And there's sort of big allocations there for flood protection schemes, for example. Now, if I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, does that mean nothing happens until that year? Or does it mean that during the course of this period, there'll be an amount up to that value spent on those programmes? Because it doesn't say impetus to me, but I mean, that's just because I don't know how to read the table properly, probably. So I'd welcome some assistance. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yep, there's a footnote at the bottom of that page. I appreciate it's not the biggest type, but it tries to explain the approach we're taking there. The flood projects in particular, obviously they've been subject to quite a bit of change and uncertainty since members initially agreed the funding allocation for these. So what we had agreed probably about 3 years ago now was that it was necessary for each of those projects to be subject to further member consideration before the funding allocations could be updated. I think the funding allocations are now out of date, and there will be a need for members to consider these projects again before they can be significantly progressed. So what we've done, rather as keep moving it every kind of 3 months, 6 months to reflect a revised profile, we've put it at the end of the 10-year strategy, so it's clear that the amounts are still retained for that purpose at the originally approved levels, but there will be a need for further member consideration before the projects move forward, and that's when we'll look to provide a new profile and reflect that in this table, if that's okay.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick come back. Thanks, Paul. And I did see the wee note. I suppose I was maybe interested in the zero waste park, which there's not been the same level of uncertainty or debate about that. I would suggest that this, the flood protection schemes, I think everybody in the room knows there's been varying opinions on that, but in terms of the zero waste park, that's got 0 spent against it in this financial year. All the other ones have got something, even though they're there, and that's got an allocation in the last year. So what's the status with that? Thank you.
Paul.
Yep. There's a report on a review of the overall waste strategy to be brought to the Communities Committee. I'm not sure exactly. I think it's early in the new calendar year, so just after the turn of the year, and that report is going to look at the role of the zero waste park as part of that overall strategy. So I agree that it's not been subject to quite the same degree of uncertainty and change, but there has been some developments that have impacted on the project, but also on the cost of the project as well. So again, it's one that will need further member consideration before it can be moved forward. I'm understanding that will initially come through the review of the overall waste service and waste strategy that will come to the Communities Committee, and then from that there'll be an opportunity for members to further consider investment in the zero waste park through this committee.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. Yeah, it's page 81. It's actually about the capital receipts. I mean, we've had this figure of £500,000 as a target for as long as I can remember, and on the face of it, it looks like we're doing okay because we're halfway through the year and we've just about got half the money. So that's looking promising. I just wondered if there was any indication, given the current economic climate with interest rates rising, if there's been a slowdown in interest in any of these properties that we've potentially got up for sale at the moment or going under offer, or does everything look like it's going to progress nicely?
Karen.
Yep, I'm pleased to report that as of yesterday we've actually now got £443,000 in on capital receipts, so we're getting closer to our £500,000 target. That's following the receipt from Kieran Ryan House, so we're pretty confident that we'll make the 500 target this year, and obviously there's a number of properties like on the market or about to be marketed, so we'll just need to keep that under review for future years, but the current year we're confident on.
That's excellent news. I'm really pleased to hear that, and perhaps in future years we should maybe inflation link the £500,000 target just to reflect current condition.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, apologies for being out there, but I don't know if it's been mentioned, but I'm just looking at 3.4 here. In terms of the environment from Dumfries Learning Town to people, kids with autistic behaviour and so forth, and moving £3.15 million to this. I totally support this. I've been banging the drum of education in terms of how we do deliver services to kids who need that additional support. And I can provide the Director and members of the Committee and Council with figures that I got back from NHS in terms of the time that kids wait and the numbers that wait for assessment of being autistic or on the autistic spectrum. It's almost 2 years that kids wait, and while we pick them up early as soon as they demonstrate or give any impression that they are on the autistic spectrum, it's far too long for kids to wait for that assessment and to be diagnosed. So in that respect, I would hope that 3.15 million will go a great deal of the way to support kids with additional support needs and those with autism or on the autistic spectrum.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. Councillor Dennerley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I would support Councillor Scobie. Yeah, I would support him because we really have to, I want to share my personal experience. I've obviously been through a long time waiting, obviously through coronavirus was waiting time as well. There's been a lot of delays during that period, but still the assessments to diagnose autism or if they're on the spectrum, as they get older, you really need to catch it before it's too late. There's a real worry there. So it's going to affect children in the future if we don't actually catch it early. So we really need to, we appreciate the thoughts in that, and it's really important for education that they get the correct support. So we'd absolutely back what Councillor Scobie has said.
Thank you. We'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to, 1, note the financial and physical progress against the 2022-23 capital programme for the quarter ending the 30th of September 22, as detailed in appendices 2, 3 and 4. 2, agree the budget veerment of £0.021 million from the property building other asset class to Glenluce Travellers site as recommended by the Economy and Resources Committee on the 14th of June 2022 as detailed at paragraph 3.3, and 3, agree to transfer of £3.15 million from the Dumfries High School project to be ring-fenced for autism provision as recommended by Education and Learning Committee on the 20th of September 22 as detailed at paragraph 3.4. Item number 11, Treasury Management Annual Report 2021 to 2022 and Mid-Year Review 2022-23, report by Head of Finance and Procurement. Members are provided with an overview of the Treasury Management activity and indicators for 2021 to 22 and the Mid-Year Report of Treasury Management activities for 2022 to 23. This report also ensures compliance with the reporting requirements set out in the CIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management and the requirement to report annually on Treasury Management activities in comparison to the intended strategy. The report highlights that the net debt position of the Council has reduced over the last year by over £18 million. Karen Donaldson and Paul Garrett are here to assist if members have any questions. We'll open up for member debate. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I was just looking at the investments taken, and this is on page 104, 105. And there's a lot of sort of loans or investments into other local authorities, I think predominantly in England or Wales, England. And so it was really just to get a sense of, you know, obviously we've increased our investment in that sense, or loans, I don't know what the correct term would be, but so are those investments safe, or are there any risks we need to know about them? Thank you.
Paul?
All of our investments are made based on the strict criteria that are reflected in the Treasury Management Strategy that's agreed annually by full Council in March before the start of the financial year. So combination of the counterparties that we invest with and the periods over which we invest look to ensure that security is absolutely the first priority. In all our investments, we look at security and liquidity before returns. So it's what I would say is not particularly safe investments in local authorities because of the kind of public sector backing are viewed as very low risk in terms of investments. What you're referring to there, Councillor Thompson, is last year's listing of the investments. Maybe just for interest in relation to something we mentioned earlier on, if you look at pages 126 to 127 of this paper, it actually gives you the investments in the first half of the current financial year. And if you look at the interest rates that we've been getting on those, obviously they're moving up, 0.22 at the start of the year and up to, it says 1.66 there at the end of or mid-August. As I mentioned earlier on, we're now up to around about the 3% level in terms of some of our temporary investments. But again, all of our investments maintain that approach of security first, liquidity second, before return, and very much in line with the strict guidance that's reflected in the Treasury Management Strategy that's agreed by members.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, no, I appreciate that, and that's yeah, interesting to see that trend in terms of the better return later on in the paper. Just as we scanned across to that, there is a wee section there that talks about compliance with Treasury limits. So it's just, I think, 4.4, where it says there was a breach of counterparty limits. I don't know if that was a timing issue or what, but the balance on 10th of August breached the 25 million limit. And I know we'd adjusted that a wee while ago, I think, from 20 to 25. So it's just, is that something that was just an aberration, if you like, on an otherwise good record? Thank you.
Yep, so one of the issues that we've had, and we talked earlier on, or in the introduction from the Chair, about the reduction in our debt, and what we've actually been seeing is that we've received a lot of funding in advance of use in the last couple of years, and this particular incident was that without prior notification we received over £13 million of funding to support early years expansion. We knew it was coming sometime, but we didn't know when. So it arrived unexpected and it pushed us over the limit on that particular morning. But on the same morning there was additional deposits made, particularly with the DMO, the Debt Management Office, to try and make sure we come back within the counterparty limits. So it was for that particular reason. It was very short lasting, it was addressed that morning, but we report it in here just because it was a temporary breach of our limit.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Campbell.
My question's been asked by Councillor Thompson. It was the question about the counterparty limits, but it's been asked. Thank you.
Move to the recommendations. Members are asked to 1. Note the contents of the Annual Treasury Management Report 2021-22 as detailed at Appendix 1, which covers Treasury management activities for the year 2021-22, which resulted in a net debt position of £134.155 million as at the 31st of March 2022, a reduction of £18.086 million from the previous year. 2. Note the details of the Treasury management activities for the period 1st of April 2022 to 30th of September 2022 as detailed in Appendix 2. And 3. Note the work being done to review the Council's permitted investment counterparty list to allow a potential expansion of permitted investments to be considered by full Council as set out at paragraphs 3.4 to 3.19. Moving on to item 12, the Procurement Annual Report for financial year 2021-22, report by Head of Finance and Procurement. We are presented with the Annual Procurement Report, which summarises activity and progress against the objectives set within the Council's corporate procurement strategy during the financial year 2021-22. The cover report provides some areas of highlight in the report, and I'm pleased to see the increased compliance levels for our procurement activity, reflecting this committee's oversight and scrutiny. In addition, I also welcome the continued economic support to our local business through our spending power and, importantly, the growing commitment of our contracted suppliers to pay the living wage to their employees. Karen Scott and Paul Garrett are here to assist if members have any questions. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so no, and it's good to get these reports here, and I think it was a big concern to this council in terms of compliance some time ago, and that's partly what the procurement review was able to start to address, and certainly having the contracts register and things has been a big illuminating and helpful information, but we're still clearly got a bit of work to do just to sort of get that where we'd like it to be. So I'm looking at page 147, and it's about the number of contracts which have either not been compliantly procured, where no formal contracts in place, or are continuing to be used after it expired. And I'm just sort of wondering, how would those be reported? Would they get reported back through the relevant committee to members if there was an issue with them, or is there ongoing work to sort of address those contracts in terms of when they're renewed or how they're monitored or regulated? Thank you.
Karen.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Thompson. The figures within page 147 in the table is a reflection of the compliance review that at the time it was undertaken, which was undertaken throughout the early parts of financial year 21-22. So obviously some action has been taken to progress that throughout that financial year, as is reflected in the final compliance position at the end of the financial year. But those actual spend areas that were identified are part of the contract work plan that does also form part of the contract register and are being prioritised accordingly.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Thompson raising that matter, because it was a concern for me on page 147. The risk of the number of arrangements where there are no formal contract in place. I'd just like to get a little bit more out of that, because there are some huge numbers here. There's 21 million between the three columns of reporting, so a little bit more on that. The other thing I would like to raise is that the recommendation is asking us to review and agree the content of the annual report. However, in Annex B, and this is a public document, there's a lot of figures from page 173 onwards which are totally out of sync. They don't actually represent. There's a lot of, something that could be looked at as £8 million, where in fact it should have been 800,000, for example. There's a number of them. The Gypsy Traveller site, for example, it's saying 11.8 million there. I'm sure it's 118,000. So there's a lot of things that's in there that probably shouldn't be in there. So are we being asked to agree a document that's not factually correct? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. I'll come in first on your first question and then pick up the second one as well. So in relation to the contracts where there was no formal contract in place, those were prioritised and were actioned within the financial year. As I'd mentioned earlier, this was an extract from the compliance review itself. The point you've raised in relation to Annex B, apologies, I'd hoped to pick that up in the opening. That was something that we have identified in advance of the committee today, and there's an issue within the spreadsheet. It happens at page 145, and actually the budget figure then matches to the wrong contract. There's been an inserted cell, so that issue has been picked up by the officers as well. So that was something I was seeking to, approval from committee today to remedy prior to publication of the annual report as well.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. It's further to Councillor Campbell's comments on the tables. There's surprisingly inaccurate figures. For instance, on page 175, it says 7.2 million is to be spent upgrading the technical classrooms at Castle Douglas High School. It's not. It's 250,000 will be spent. And on page 178, it talks about an Oakwell Road roundabout. Now, as far as I know, there's been no consultation on this. It's the table says £20,000 will be spent on a survey, and we investigated it as the ward councillors, and it's actually £50,000 is going to be spent on a survey to remove the cycle lanes from the roadways to keep the cyclists separate from the vehicles. Now, seeing this figure in these papers, this was the first time any of the ward councillors knew about this. We checked with community councils. This work is apparently going ahead. The £50,000 is to be spent on this survey, and there's been no local consultation. So I don't think a capital spend paper should be where ward councillors find out what's actually happening in their wards. Thank you.
Just to clarify as well, I think this relates to the previous question as well, and so it's from that point on in that Annex B report there is an issue within the spreadsheet that had been identified just ahead of today's committee, so that will be remedied. So the figures that are presented within that table in Annex B are misaligned to the actual contract areas, hence the reason it understandably is creating some confusion within committee today, but that will be remedied as soon as the meeting's taking place today prior to any publication and finalising of the report.
Thank you, Karen. But my other point was ward councillors should be finding out from a capital spend what's going to happen in their ward. There should be proper consultation before the spend is agreed.
Lorna.
Councillor Young, you make a really important point. My understanding was that this information would have been presented through the relevant service to ward councillors on a regular basis. So this is really just reflecting historic information around contracts and procurement of contracts. Officers only disclose that at the point of bringing these reports forward, and would be assured by members of the service responsible that this information in terms of the application of it and the projects would be updated there. So we'll take that away and speak with the service itself and ask for them to contact you directly and other members to reassure you on that matter.
Thank you very much.
Councillor McGregor.
Thanks very much, Chair, and sorry I'll have to keep my camera off. I'm working very remotely today. Just touching on Councillor Young's points at page 178 in respect to Castle Douglas, accepting what Lorna's just said, we do have a regional problem where we're doing sort of piecemeal little projects here and there without proper consultation, with community or community councils or even elected members. And Harry will be very aware of an EV charging point issue that's ongoing. And I think that although this is about procurement, it touches towards a need for a better strategic vision for active travel and roads and infrastructure and the such like. And I'd just like that to be flagged today, because certainly the community in Castle Douglas are probably going to be slightly concerned that there's £50,000 being spent on a consultation and to look at works when the local members haven't even had sight of that. So I just want that to be on record. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, it's just on the point being made by John Young and followed on by Gail. And I know that within our group, the Councillor Ian Howie has also raised this as a local issue in terms of the consultation and monies being spent. But as Lorna knows, I've raised the disconnect between service committees to area committees to communities at the Chair and Vice Chair meeting that we held in Stranraer. And I think it does need looked at in terms of the information that's provided from service committees to area committees down to communities. And we maybe look at how the area committees function. I know that was something that met with consensus at the Chair and Vice Chairs, but it's the priority being given to that. And I would hope that we do look at that in terms of information filtering through to local wards. And we do that through the area committee if that's, I'm sure it is possible.
Thanks, Thanks, Councillor Scobie. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, apologies for coming in again. It was actually just on the sheet, which obviously is going to be corrected because of the data error. But in terms of the presentation, it does list the length of contract, and I know some of them are still TBC, but it might be helpful with just a context of, does that mean they're in situ just now, or is there a start date, or when do they end? So the value of the contract over the period of time is helpful, but it's hard to know when they've begun, or if they're about to begin, or if they're nearly finished. So that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Karen?
Yeah. Just to clarify, for this particular report, Councillor Thompson, these were all ones that were prepared at the start of the new financial year that were planned to be delivered within future years. So none of these were live contracts at the time of the end of financial year 21-22, i.e. March, end of March this year. But certainly for going forward, they'll take that on board for future update reports.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, thanks for letting me back in, Chair. Yeah, because it's a historic report. I'm just looking at page 195, where it says that the new procurement SharePoint will go live. I'm just wondering, has that been actioned? Thanks.
Karen?
It has, yes, it's been actioned.
Move to the recommendation. Members are asked to review and agree the content of the procurement annual report for financial year 2021-22 provided at the appendix, and note it shall be published on the Council website as required by the Procurement Reform Scotland Act 2014. With the amendments, yep. Moving on to item 13, Procurement and Commissioning Performance Update, Financial Year 2022-23, Quarter 1 Report by Head of Finance and Procurement. This report provides an overview on the key procurement activities delivered during the first quarter of 2022-2023. This report is intended to highlight to members key issues, risks and successes relating to procurement activity during this time, and provides details of recent events held for local suppliers. Karen Scott and Paul Garrett are here to assist if members have any questions. I'll open it up to member debate. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to compliment the Meet the Buyer event in Dumfries. I went along in, well, two capacities, one as a supplier and one as an elected member, and there was actually a real buzz about the place. It was really good. Everyone I spoke to was quite enthusiastic about it, so well done on that. We've got the Q1 report here. We're in November now. Why have we not got Q2? I take it perhaps this report was meant for the previous meeting, but and then I've got another couple of questions just after that.
Yeah, the quarter one report does tend to just take a bit in terms of getting all of our data out of the financial systems for the first quarter of the year. So traditionally it has came to this particular committee, and then we sort of catch up at that point. So we've currently got the draft of the quarter two report available at the moment as well, so it would then come to the next committee.
Thanks. And the next thing is, when you go to page 207, we did a bit of work before with in the Audit and Risk Committee last time about building local economy and engaging with local suppliers. And as I've mentioned, your Meet the Buyer event and things is a great way forward with that. But we're at 30.44% for contracts awarded to local suppliers. Is this a phasing issue? Are there more contracts coming up? So perhaps we will reach target. And the other one that looks a bit scary is 17 out of 150 awarded locally. That looks like you've got a mountain to climb there.
Karen.
Thank you. In terms of the first achievement of the 30.44%, that indicator is based on our spend, so it's not uncommon in Q1 again for us to have a lower than where we would hope to be in position, just due to a lot of annual orders that are paid out at the start of the year, particularly for a lot of IT licences, for example, which are traditionally not delivered by any of the local supply base in D&G. So we tend to be often in Q1 below target and then recover throughout the rest of the financial year. So there's nothing at this point to give any concern that we would not be looking to achieve that target at the end of the financial year once things all started to average out and have the kind of mixed spend throughout the financial year. In relation to the number of contracts being awarded as well, we've got the 17 against a target of 150. Again, that's common that Q1 is a slightly below average. If we were to take the 150 and divide it by 4, Q1 we would tend not to achieve, just because it takes us time to conduct the procurement processes. So Q1 is a very busy month in terms of the tendering activity, with the awards tending to be in Q2 and Q3 for delivery throughout the rest of the financial year. So again, as much as it's a low figure against the overall target for the year, it doesn't give any cause for concern at this point.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Jimison.
Yeah, I'm referring to Appendix 1 on page 207, point 6. Number of regulated contracts awarded during the period that included Fair Work criterion. What is the Fair Work criterion and how is it audited? And I'm concerned there's 33% of the contracts are awarded, presumably to companies that don't abide by Fair Work criterion. So how is that audited, and is it taken into consideration when you're awarding contracts rather than the tender price?
Karen.
Thank you. So in terms of the Fair Work criterion, there's a standard list provided through Scottish Government policy, which has 7 criterion, which includes things like the pay, if they pay living wage to their employees, use of 0-hour contracts, etc. So there's 7 criteria that's considered within that. But the 67% target actually related to 5 contracts that did not include the criterion, so we only include that where it's proportionate and relevant to the subject matter of the contract. So of those 5 contracts, 3 of them were actually for supply of vehicle, so it was a straight supply. There was no significant personnel involved, as we would expect to see in a works or services contract. Of the other 2, one was the care and repair services contract, which obviously had a 2p transfer and was between 2 public sector organisations. So again, they would still be in receipt of fair working practice arrangements within the public sector employer, but we didn't assess that as part of the tender process, hence the reason it doesn't get captured here. And the last one was again for an IT licence, and it was an extension, so it was assessed at the original contract's letting, but not part of the extension decision making process, hence the reason it wasn't assessed at this point.
So there is you're comfortable with your audit process that if somebody says they're abiding by the Fair Work, then you ensure that they do follow up and deliver Fair Work practices?
As far as can reasonably be done, obviously we do award a significant number of contracts across the council, so it is through a self-declaration basis, but we also, through our contract monitoring and management, particularly where we think there's a high risk, we would put additional resource in to support the management and monitoring of that.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Dorward.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Jamieson's already asked the question I was going to ask about Fair Work, the Appendix 1, Part 6. Thanks.
Councillor Johnston.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me back in. It's just on the back of Councillor Jameson there, and we've been presented with a report, and surely it would be better if we express the percentage of contracts where applicable, or something along that basis, because it does look. I agree. I was rather surprised that it was 67%. It has to be said, and it doesn't bode well if you look at it like that. But if, as you've explained, for things like IT licenses and things, I mean, It makes perfect sense. I just find it a bit bizarre that we've got a figure reported like that when there's, you know, glaring deficiencies in how it's calculated and reported.
Karen?
Yeah, noted, and I'll pick that up for future updates of similar reports. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Move to the recommendation. Members are asked to note the update on the Council's procurement performance and activities during Q1, 1st of April 2022 to 30th of June 2022 of this financial year as detailed in appendices 1 and 2 of this report. Item 14, implementation of Financial Code 11 debt write-offs report by Head of Finance and Procurement. This report provides details of debt written off under delegated procedures under the 6-month period 1st of April 2022 to the 30th of September 2022 for member scrutiny. Lindsay Wilson and Paul Garrett are here to assist if members have any questions. I'll open up the meeting to member debate. I can't see anybody wanting to come in, so I'll move to the recommendation. Members are asked to note and scrutinise the write-offs from the following accounts which have been written off under delegated authority. One non-domestic rates account where the amount being written off exceeds £10,000 as summarised at paragraph 3.8 and detailed in the appendix. And 2 accounts below £10,000 for council tax, non-domestic rates, sundry debtors and overpaid housing benefit, which have been written off as summarised in paragraph 3.10. Item 15, Head of Service end of year assessment, 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2022 of Finance and Procurement Business Plan 2019 to 2023 performance, report by Head of Finance and Procurement. This report provides members with the Head of Finance and Procurement's end-of-year assessment of the progress on the delivery of the business plan for finance and procurement for the period 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2022. The report also provides more detailed information on health and safety performance. Paul Garrett is here to assist if members have any questions. We'll open up the meeting to member debate. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, would it be useful if we can get more than 1 year's, you know, in the KPIs, because sometimes, you know, just a year's information isn't enough. So if we get, say, even 3-5 years, and then we can see if there's an actual trend going on there. Thanks.
Paul.
Yep, I think you're referring to Appendix 1 there, Councillor. Yep, I mean, happy to try and reflect that. In terms of the content and structure of Appendix 1, it's following a kind of corporate format, so these reports are taken to each service committee, and this is a standard approach. So it's the same information that's reflected to each, but happy to speak to colleagues within the kind of performance team to see if that can be updated or adjusted. But even if that's not the case, where it's useful, we can maybe bring into the narrative a wee bit more about where trends over previous years are particularly notable, and we'll try and do that in future reports.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I think it's probably an ongoing thing which is to do with the capital spending, and there is an exception report there on page 261, but you know, we've seen this figure of 71.02% against the target, and while there, you know, obviously there's extenuating circumstances related to the pandemic response, etc., but this wasn't a new issue, I think, so and it might have been helpful to have those longer term comparisons to be able to see the trend of how we've met our capital spending targets over the years. But where are we going with this in terms of addressing it? Because it's certainly something that's a frustration to elected members when we can't deliver our own agreed capital programme when there's money there. And we're at a point now where we're actually saving money, as we've seen in earlier reports, to put aside because it's going to cost more to do the projects we've not done today. It's going to cost us more to do them tomorrow. And if we can't meet these targets, then we're actually setting ourselves up to fail. So it is a big concern for this council, I think. So is there anything more to add to the actual exception report to say how this is successfully getting taken forward? Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, no, all fair points, and this is a real issue for the council in terms of delivery of agreed capital projects. Just on the trend, I mean, hopefully the information that Appendix 2 and page 261 is quite useful in that respect. What it shows is that in the pre-COVID period we were at a much higher level in terms of delivery of the approved programme. It was 93.6% in 1920, and it's during that COVID period that we've seen, you know, the significant kind of reductions there. But I do appreciate that this is an underlying problem, particularly in relation to some of our bigger priority projects like the flood projects and the Dumfries Waste Park project we referred to earlier. So through the PMO, there's a lot of work being done in terms of the property side to make sure that we're far clearer on the delivery arrangements and timetables for our projects. One of the things that's being looked at corporately at the minute is establishing a PMO, which also applies to infrastructure projects, so we can get that same discipline and approach into those as well and try and address some of these difficulties that we've got going forward. But we'll look to reflect on that as part of development of the capital investment strategy the members will be considering in February this year. But it is a particular area where there is underlying problems, but as I say, through that approach, particularly in infrastructure projects, we're looking to see that improve going forward and come back to members with further detail on that.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. Looking at page 259, it's one of the targets that gets discussed nearly every year. It's the one about the percentage of invoices paid within 30 days. And I do understand and was aware of some of the issues you were having with the PTP system and everything else. Has that been resolved? And one of the reasons why we keep mentioning it, or I personally keep mentioning it, is because, again, it's one of these barriers to local people engaging, because they have a perception that the council doesn't pay their bills quickly, which is obviously complete nonsense from this paper, but it's a perception that's out there.
Paul?
Sorry, no, that's a helpful question, because we have got an update in relation to more recent performance. But the points you're referring to there, Councillor Thompson, we had some serious issues with the overall council network. Sorry, Johnson, sorry about that. We had some serious issues with the overall network across the council around about kind of Christmas to the turn of the financial year, and because of the nature of the activities within payment of invoices, any kind of network kind of underperformance results in a kind of slowdown. So our performance kind of around about Christmas to the end of the year was less than it had been previously. But those network problems have been largely addressed now, and I got an update this week on the kind of current performance. So it was less than, it was just over the 90% level at the turn of the year. It was up to about 94% by July, and the figures for October are just about 96%. So we're seeing a gradual improvement now that we've returned to more effective overall network performance. So hopefully that will continue for the year going forward, and we're looking to up the target going forward to reflect that. We're expecting to see that improved performance on an ongoing basis.
Councillor Johnston.
Again, you're referring, I think, because it's one of the points I make to people. You know, if you get your invoice right, you'll get it paid. You know, which, and is this 96%? Is that 96% of all invoices, or all correct invoices?
Paul?
I think it's all invoices, but I can see Lindsay's on the screen, and Lindsay is very much closer to this than myself, so happy to bring Lindsay in if that's helpful, Lindsay.
Yeah, it's all invoices. The council makes a good point that one of the sort of difficulties in the terms of the shortfall is there's often disputes over the value of the invoices or the contents of the invoices, and it's difficult for ourselves to take kind of control of that, because it's really been a sense between the sort of supplier and the sort of ordering department. But we have been using over the last sort of 18 months a new system called Integra requisition supply system that links very closely to the orders. So if the invoice and the order match exactly, it's automatically paid. There's no human intervention, but there is often sort of difficulties with slight variances in terms of prices, that type of thing, or quantities, because often say a supplier can't deliver the exact detail of the order, and that throws things out and causes a bit of research into why there's a discrepancy there. But generally speaking, as the councillor said, if the invoice is correct, then I'll get paid within about 10 days, no problem at all.
Thanks, Lindsay. Councillor Dorward.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. I certainly echo Councillor Thompson's views in terms of capital spending. I'd just like to add some more on that. I think there's definitely a clear need to refocus on the delivery of high level and big ticket areas that, and I do accept that COVID has played quite a big part in that. However, I'd like to stress that we really need to put a lot into refocusing on that. And I suppose the linking into other papers that have been presented here, it's reassuring to see recognition is there in terms of capacity and resilience, and actually ensuring that we have the key people to do the key jobs in the council for the next couple of years, because that certainly reflects the ambition that I think we have now. So thank you.
We'll move to the recommendation. Members are asked to, 1, review the summary of performance for the Finance and Procurement Business Plan for the period 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2022, which includes the performance information on health and safety and the management of risks within the services risk register at Appendix 1. 2, scrutinise the exception reporting and consider whether the actions proposed are adequate to improve performance and future monitoring of areas which have not met the target. Appendix 2. And 3, agree the proposed amendments to the current business plan measures in Appendix 3. Item number 16, Alive Community Radio Scale Community Asset Transfer Request for the former Lockside Enterprise Workshops, Shirley Road, Dumfries, DG2 OED. Report by Head of Community Services. This report presents a community asset transfer request from Alive Community Radio for the transfer of ownership of Lockside Enterprise Workshops in Dumfries. This transfer has been recommended by Nithsdale Area Committee as set out at paragraph 3.10. Darren Burns is here to assist if members have any questions. I'll open up the meeting to member debate. Councillor Stitt.
Happy to go with the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, I think we've got options here as well, haven't we? It's not just a case of going with the recommendations. So, I mean, I would suggest if we're going for an option, we agree with what the Nithsdale Area Committee did, or take on board their considerations.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. I'll move to the recommendations. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Apologies. Yeah. So Nithsdale Area Committee, is that, which option is that in terms of, is that option 1, 2, or 3 from the ones presented? Option 2. Right. So it was just to be clear. Thank you. That's fine.
Move to the recommendations. Members are asked to 1. Consider the Alive Communities radio asset transfer request as laid out in the asset transfer application at Appendix 1 and business plan at Appendix 2. 2. Consider the outcome of officer assessment of the request in relation to the Council's requirement to meet best value as detailed at paragraph 3.5 and the officer recommendation at paragraph 3.11. 3. Note the outcome of the social value assessment of the proposed transfer at detailed at paragraph 3.6. 4. Note the recommendation from Nithsdale Area Committee meeting of 29th of September 2022 as detailed in paragraph 3.1. Lorna's got to come in here.
Just to kind of help members with the recommendations here. So recommendation 5 would be to agree option 2, detailed at paragraph 3.12, to transfer Lochside Enterprise Workshops to Alive Community Radio and the conditions set by Nithsdale Area Committee.
Councillor Johnson.
It was just a small point about these arrangements. You know, it refers to the arrangements for recovering the asset. You know, what are the arrangements? I'm fully supportive of it. We gave it a severe rattling around at Nithsdale Area Committee after a long day at full council. And we were sitting there and I can't remember how long it was, and we went through this at length, but it was really just what the arrangements were. How was that set up?
Darren.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Certainly in the transfer of the asset, there will be conditions that if the organisation is wound up, it would return to the council.
Do I need to read it back? No. Right. So move on to item 17, which is the Lockerbie Squash and Racquetball Club Community Asset Transfer in Common Goodland, Glasgow Road, Lockerbie, DG11 2AR. Report by Head of Community Services. This report presents a community asset transfer request from Lockerbie Squash and Racquetball Club for the transfer of common good land at Glasgow Road, Lockerbie. The Lockerbie and Lochmaben Common Good Subcommittee considered the request and their recommendation is set out at paragraph 3.11 of the report. Stephen Wiley is here to assist if members have any questions. Open the meeting to member debate. Councillor Walters.
Just a quick question as to why there isn't 3 options for this this proposal, because it just seems to be the 2 options, and it doesn't mention anything about what happens if Lockerbie Squash Club goes bust or is bought over or whatever. Can anybody clarify that?
Stephen.
Maybe Jamie Ferguson, I see who's online, but Stephen Miley was due at committee today. Jamie, do you want to come in?
Londa, don't know if you can hear me. Happy to come in. Jamie Ferguson here. Quite happy that this goes in as a condition. It's almost become a standard condition of community asset transfers that if the organisation winds up, the property comes back to the council. In terms of the 2 options, in terms of scoring, usually we put in a 3rd option should the scoring be low beyond a certain threshold, that there's an option for members to we put the 3 options in rather than simply 2 options. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thanks, Jamie.
So why aren't there three options? Sorry? Sorry, can I just come back on that then?
Yep.
So the officer's saying that normally there would be three options there, but that doesn't answer the question of why there's only two options. And are we able to include a third option?
Jamie, do you just want to clarify that for Councillor Young, please?
I'll come up back in, Chair. Yes, it's at members' discretion what options they choose to add. I mean, these are the officer recommendations, but members can they can put conditions on a CAT, or they can provide a third option should they choose to do so.
Thanks, Jamie. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I don't think, certainly area committee, everybody was minded to support that this transfer go ahead. In terms of conditions, I don't think we really bottomed anything like that out. I think the concern at the time was about, there's a bit of interest because it was a piece of land that turned out to be common good. So there's a bit of discussion about that. But in terms of, even if it were to revert back to the council through condition, it would no longer be common good, it would just be council land effectively, as far as I understand it. So I'm just happy to agree the transfer. In terms of the conditions, if there is a standard condition, that it would revert to the council, but often we get the advice that if it's a trust or a scheme or a charitable body, the aims of that particular body would normally preclude any sort of opportunistic sale to a property developer, whatever. It would tend to be any further destination for the property would be in line with the values of the outside body. So I don't know if, unfortunately, our case officer is not here to answer that sort of concern, but maybe Jamie could sort of add to that. I mean, if that's, have I got my understanding correct there, Jamie, through yourself, Chair?
Jamie?
Yeah, you have, Councillor Thompson, get your understanding correct. It's almost a condition that doesn't need to be applied in terms of it. The organisation not being able to sell on because it's part of their conditions of registration with Oscar as a SKIO.
Right.
Just happy to agree the recommendation to transfer, I think, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, I'm happy to second. I mean, the Lockerbie and Lochmaven Common Good Subcommittee were quite happy to agree the recommendation going forward to FPT without conditions, but if that's a standard condition, happy to second Councillor Thompson.
Right, I'll move to the recommendations. Members are asked to, 1, consider the Lockerbie Squash and Racquetball Club asset transfer request as laid out in the Stage 2 asset transfer application at Appendix 1, the business plan and accounts at Appendix 2 and the project plan at Appendix 3. 2, consider the outcome of the officer assessment of the request in relation to the Council's requirement to meet best value as detailed at paragraph 3.5 and the officer recommendation at paragraph 3.10. 3, note the outcome of the social value assessment of the proposed transfer as detailed at paragraph 3.6. And 4, note the recommendation from Lockerbie and Lochmaben Common Good Subcommittee of the 20th of September 2022 at paragraph 3.11. And 5, agree option 1 from those listed at paragraph 3.12 to transfer Lockerbie Squash and Racquet Club, Glasgow Road, Lockerbie DG11 2AR for the land on which the club sits and the adjoining land, all of which extends to approximately 11,500 square metres to Lockerbie Squash and Racquetball Club. Right. Moving on to item 18, which is the Tundergarth Memorial Room and Ruin, Community Asset Transfer, Tundergarth, DG11 2PU, report by Head of Community Services. This report presents a community asset transfer request from Tundergarth Kirks for the transfer of the Memorial Room and Ruin at Tundergarth. The recommendation of Annandale and Eskdale Area Committee is set out at paragraph 3.11. And Jamie Ferguson is here to assist. If members have any questions, I'll open the meeting up to member debate. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to agree option 1 for this. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to second that, so we'll move to the recommendation. Members are asked to 1. Consider the Tundergath Kirk's asset transfer request as laid out in Stage 2 asset transfer application at Appendix 1 and Community Plan at Appendix 2. 2. Consider the outcome of officer assessment of the request in relation to the Council's requirement to meet best value as detailed at paragraph 3.5 and the officer recommendation at paragraph 3.10. 3. Note the outcome of the social value assessment of the proposed transfer as detailed at paragraph 3.6. 4. Note the recommendation of Andale and Estill Area Committee of the 28th of September 2022 at paragraph 3.11. And 5. Agree option 1 from those listed at paragraph 3.12 to transfer Tundergath Memorial Room in Ruin, Tundergath DG11 2PU, which extends to approximately 183 square metres to Tundergath Kirks without conditions. Okay. And I've not been notified of any urgent business, so can I thank members for their contribution today, and I'll bring this meeting to a close. Thank you.